Okay, let's get started. Good evening and welcome to the April edition of IOG's Policy Crunch, our monthly speaker series that explores disruption and convergence in public policy and governance. I'm Jeff Kinder, Executive Director for Science and Innovation here at IOG and the host of Policy Crunch. I want to thank my colleague, Stephen Van Dyne, who organized and will moderate tonight's panel, and the whole Policy Crunch team of Rhonda Moore and Becky Hollett, our producer, without whom we wouldn't be here. If you're not familiar with the IOG, the Institute is an independent, not-for-profit think tank with expertise in public governance. We offer a range of advisory services, leadership and learning offerings, research, and thought leadership. And we convene discussions like Policy Crunch. This evening, our topic is innovation in the Arctic and Canada's long-term plan for infrastructure development in the North. Before I go further, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement for those of us in Ottawa. And for those of you joining us from elsewhere, I encourage you to add your own acknowledgement in the chat. We pay respect to the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. For those of you who have joined us before, you'll know that we divide the Policy Crunch sessions into 3 parts. In the first part, Stephen will introduce the topic and our speakers, and they will each provide brief opening remarks. In the second part, we open the floor for questions from you, the audience. So please submit your questions via the chat function, on Twitter using hashtag PolicyCrunch, or on our Policy Crunch Slack channel. We're also live streaming to our YouTube channel, so those of you watching on YouTube can submit questions via the YouTube chat. Then for the third part, at the top of the hour, we'll wrap up the formal part of the program, switch off the live feed, and sort each of our speakers into breakout rooms. This will give those of you in the Zoom an opportunity to continue the conversation and perhaps ask that question that didn't get asked in plenary. At that time, we'll ask you to enter in the chat function the name of the speaker that you'd like to visit, and Becky will move you into the appropriate room. We'll wrap those discussions up by about 7:20 or so, when we say so long until next month. On that note, we hope you will be able to join us on May 4th for a Policy Crunch entitled Disruption in the Lab, Government Science and Innovation in the New Normal, where we will explore some of our findings from a collaborative hindsight exercise on the impacts of the pandemic on the federal government's science and technology community. But first, let's crunch innovation in the Arctic. Our moderator this evening is Stephen Van Dyne, Senior Vice President of Public Governance here at IOG. Stephen spent his early years in the Northwest Territories, where he worked in community planning with the City of Yellowknife. And since 1997, he has worked for a variety of roles in the federal public service, including at Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada and Parks Canada. Stephen joined the IOG last fall, and it is now my pleasure to hand things over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Jeff. I want to, first of all, acknowledge you and our colleagues, Rhonda Moore and Becky Hollett, who is directing behind the scenes for putting together the Policy Crunch series. You've created a valuable forum for the IOG and the broader good governance community, and it's giving me this opportunity to convene colleagues and friends on a subject that holds great interest to me, so thank you very much. So it's my pleasure to set a little bit of context and introduce our distinguished panel this evening. I'll begin with a little bit of context and then introduce our distinguished speakers who many of you may have heard and read from before. The topic tonight, we're talking about the Arctic, and it's been an innovative space for governance and reconciliation for a number of years. It's been a place where things have happened that have not been possible in other parts of the country, if not or yet. In terms of bringing together Indigenous and non-Indigenous, public and industry, and a multitude of perspectives in the management and the sustainable development of the Arctic. Yet Canada's Arctic seems falling off the agenda, and infrastructure is falling between the cracks amongst many of the different responsibility centers that have been created under various agreements. Meanwhile, climate change, geopolitics, and global supply chains are converging, potentially to squeeze Canada out of the Arctic and deny sustainable economic development opportunities for Northerners. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce a distinguished panel of Canadian patriots from civil society. Dr. Robert Hubert is an associate professor at the Department of Political Science at the University of Calgary. Dr. Jessica Shadian is the president and CEO of Arctic 360 and has spent the last 20 years living and working as an academic and a consultant throughout Europe and North American Arctic. Clint Davis is the Chief Executive Officer of Nunisi Corporation, an Inuit Development Corporation headquartered in Iqaluit, and brings many years of experience in the banking industry and is from Nunatsiavut. Madeline Redfern is a member of the National Indigenous Economic Development Consortium, Arctic 360, Trudeau Foundation, the president of the IOGs Group and Northern Robotics, Chief Operating Officer of CanArctic Inuit Networks, and president of Sedinka Marine Systems, and is probably more famously known for being the former mayor of Iqaluit. Our panelists have been invited to provide a brief opening set of comments, and I'll invite in the order of the way that I've introduced them. So I'll turn it quickly over to you, Rob, to kick us off.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Stephen. It's indeed my pleasure to be here to participate in such a critically important panel on an issue area that all of us know and love, but unfortunately seems to have a bit of a challenge in getting the attentions from the powers that be. In the introductions to our comments, I want to focus on two major themes. The first theme is, of course, no matter what we want to discuss, no matter where we would like to take the issue, the international environment has a way of overpowering many of the issues that we are now, of course, trying to deal with when we talk about the new North, the new Arctic. The second part of the themes that I would like to address are some of the major research, some of the major policy challenges that we are now facing. Now, in terms of the international side of dealing with infrastructure, I think there are two news items from last week that we really need to be paying attention to that will have a very dramatic set of impacts on the long-term sustainability of almost all of the issues that we'll be looking at the Arctic, and particularly on the need for a coordinated infrastructure approach. The first one was, of course, the shutting down of the Suez Canal. We often talk about choke points. We often talk about the manner of what if a major shipping route was to be impacted upon? What if the South China Sea erupts into conflict? What if Suez? Well, we had a chance to have a look at it. And not terribly surprising, as soon as the Suez Canal shut down for the time period when that ship was blocking the passageway, we immediately saw a lot of other interest talking about what this then meant for consolidating and pushing on utilizing northern routes to do shipping. Now, once again, the 1 week or the few days that the shipping was shut down isn't going to affect it right now, but I think it has alerted everybody to some of the dangers that we were facing in terms of our supply system elsewhere. And it brought, I think, to everyone's attention what will be coming into the future. The other event that many people have not yet completely been made aware of is that the Russian government announced a further amendment to its extended continental shelf. Now, the Russians were, of course, the first ones to issue the signs of their extended continental shelf back in 2000. They then issued an extension on the continental shelf. On Thursday, they then issued another amendment, which completely overlaps with the entire Canadian and Danish continental shelf submissions. In other words, they've gone right up into our EEZs, and I think it illustrates to us that the process may seemingly be looking as if it is going to be done in accordance with the peaceful manner outlined by the UNCLOS system of determining your continental shelf. I think the fact that the Russians have gone right up to the very far boundary, right up to our EZ, illustrates how serious they are on this. What this means for us, of course, is that we have coming challenges that are coming sooner rather than later. When it comes to the Northwest Passage, we now have to ask ourselves if we are serious about them being an internal water. At what point do we actually start having the capabilities of saying no to the shipping we don't want? In terms of the extended continental shelf, we are probably going to have some very interesting negotiations coming forward with the Russians. But the side point is, of course, the geopolitical changes and what that then means that we have to do with our American friends and allies in terms of the modernization of NORAD and other such defensive means. All of these are going to be requiring extensive infrastructure requirements, and they need to be done now rather than later. Thank you very much.
You were very respectful of the time limitations, Rob. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to now ask our colleague and friend Jessica Shadian to provide her opening remarks.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah,
you're good.
Yeah, nice and clear.
Okay. My video is on. I wasn't sure if you do it. But thank you, Stephen. Thank you, IOG, for inviting myself and all of my colleagues as well for us to speak about, as Rob said, this vitally important issue. And my task today is basically to connect the international with the national. And so I'm just going to start by saying a few broad things and then hone in on two specific things. You know, when we want to connect the international to the national and thinking in the context of the national, Canadians at large just need to start seeing the North as part of Canada, you know, part of Canadian society and the economy, and rather than some far away detached place. It also needs to be understood then as a region that contributes to Canada's strength and could and should contribute so much more. The North needs to literally, physically, and virtually be connected to the rest of Canada. You know, it's not something that we sing about or pay homage to polar bears. It's literally 40% of our country's land mass. So currently, and as Rob has eloquently pointed out, the current lack of infrastructure in the North creates a national security vulnerability for the whole of Canada. And it also creates everything from a health to food and economic security for those that live there. So from a national perspective, but thinking in the context of the international sphere, two things need to be addressed when it comes to infrastructure, innovation and investment. The first is that we really need to have a federally coordinated effort. And by that, we need an Arctic strategy. And I'm not talking about a framework or anything like the strategies that we've had in the past. What we need is a long-term, 20 years at least, political and economic strategy that justifies the investment strategy that an Arctic strategy would also include. We need to be doing something to the effect of what the Russians did earlier before building their Northern Sea Route. You know, they did a feasibility study to understand the costs and the returns on investment. So a Canadian version would look very different though, because it would also include the social costs of not investing in infrastructure, including of abrogating its responsibilities to Northerners. It would also include the costs by not building to Canadian national security. But it would also see returns on investment in a broader context. So what kind of real social returns on investment that infrastructure would provide? And what kind of returns would it give us in terms of our own sovereignty and security? And that strategy should also then include a clear roadmap for investment. So what projects should be invested in, when, to what ends, and who will pay for them? And why should those be the priorities? There's a lot of existing initiatives that could be utilized to learn basically what Inuit and First Nations see as priorities, what the territorial governments, what their priorities are, what the federal, like what Ottawa considers as its own priorities for the North, and bringing those together. And from there, you know, necessary business cases for those projects must be built. And when it comes to the federal government, it would make sense for its infrastructure investment strategies to be considered in the context of its already existing national priorities. Again, not disconnected and somewhere apart from it, but actually as a north part of Canada. And so it really needs to be folded into our larger national priorities. So for example, Canada wants to lead the world in EVs. Well, Ottawa has launched this Mines to Mobility campaign. And what we know is that China right now has a monopoly on the world's rare earth minerals. And we also know that Canada's north has an abundance of those minerals. Well, we know who controls the world's supply of rare earth materials will control the future of much of international trade. And it's also very much a concern of high national security. So what kind of national investments then should Ottawa make so that Canada can take advantage of developing its rare earth materials in the north, in addition to other regions of the country that also have rare earth minerals? I mean, does it really make sense just say, oh, we've got this some elsewhere, it's too complicated in the north, let's just leave them in the ground and hope that we can produce enough to overtake China's monopoly, or I don't know, maybe soon the United States will buy them, buy or invest in Greenland's rare earths. Again, we need to see the north as the opportunity for all of Canada that it is. I mean, another example, the north needs to be built into Canada's post-COVID Build Back Better plans. Minister McKenna, I saw an interview on BNN about the plans for post-COVID infrastructure. And while the word Indigenous was stated, I think one time during the entire conversation, it really spoke to the provinces, and the word north and the word territory was never mentioned. And I think the CIB is another area where there needs to be specific focus on the north. The CIB is designed to attract public investment. So the north should be able to attract FDI when it's appropriate, but this is only going to happen if the CIB considerably steps up its game and goes outside of the conventional toolkit that's used, like, let's say, by TD and others. It needs to figure out what it must do to help attract the kind of private investment, such as pension funds, that we want to have investing in the north, to help offset risk, meet upfront gaps in ROI, et cetera. And if we don't do this, then the only bidders will be China. And they're the ones that are using economic investment at the time right now as a real long-term political tool. So other areas include innovation, where we have ocean superclusters, but we don't have one for the Arctic. We should maybe be taking a page from the Nordic nations playbooks, how they see their northern regions and their cold actually as opportunities for investment. So that brings me to the second piece, and infrastructure needs to be on par with where new infrastructure is going globally. The world is turning to smart infrastructure. It's not coming, it's actually here. And so all infrastructure today, from roads to ports, is built to accommodate smart and connected global logistics and supply chains. Infrastructure then needs to be equipped with built-in sensors to lower logistics and operating costs. They create efficiencies. The data collectors, collected factors in monitoring for health, safety, environmental change, and security. And there's a lot of discussion about, some of the big projects that Canada's talking about, Grays Bay Port Road, Slave Geological Province Road. But if those infrastructures are not smart and built with the kind of embedded sensors, then how are they going to serve Canada's supply chains, or really the mines that they expect to be connected to? When all cargo trucks are going to soon be automated and require sensors for AI, well, how will a conventional all-season road then function? So, and we know these things are possible because, again, if we look to our some of our Arctic neighbors, they literally are doing just this, including building this type of stuff on permafrost. So, I would say, and then we really need all hands on deck then to build northern infrastructure. I don't know if we need a northern infrastructure innovation supercluster or what, but we need a specific strategy, and it needs to be a very forward-looking strategy in the long term. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jessica. So we'll quickly turn to our colleague, Clint Davis, moving from, as you'll see, international perspective from Rob to a national column from Jessica, and Clint with providing a very insightful regional perspective. So go ahead, Clint. Good to see you.
Great to see you too, and Nakamik, for having me here to speak to such an esteemed group and to be on such an esteemed panel. So I really appreciate that. What I want to talk about today is to give you my perspective in terms of the experience that I've had over the last over 10 years, working with Inuit development corporations. And in particular now as the CEO for Nunasi Corporation, which is an Inuit development corporation headquartered in Iqaluit, Nunavut. The message I want to send is that while we do have these infrastructure challenges, Inuit business, both entrepreneurs and development corporations, have been building over the last 40 years a significant capacity as well as capital and the network to be able to support this upcoming investment and required investment. So Nunasi Corporation is the oldest Inuit development corporation in the country. It was established in 1976. And the reason why it was established was to create a platform to ensure that Inuit would be able to participate in economic activity that were to be expected from the resolution of the Inuit land claims. So over that period of time, a number of other Inuit development corporations stretching from Nunatsiavut and Labrador all the way over to the Inuvialuit region in the Northwest Territories have been able to develop, grow, and to be able to invest in a variety of different businesses and different joint ventures and within different industries all throughout the North. I've been the chair of the Nunatsiavut Group of Companies for 11 years, an organization that's been around since the early 80s. And it has been able to hire, train, develop, and support Inuit employees from our region over that period of time. And what we're seeing now with these development corporations is this requirement and this need to be able to ensure that we have a level of collaboration so that we are able to identify those opportunities and come together as partners to ensure that we're able to participate in this economic activity. So just over the last couple of years, we created what was referred to as the Inuit Development Corporation Association. That's where we had the 6 development corporations come together, as well as Makivik Corporation, which politically represents the interests of Nunavik Inuit in Northern Quebec. And the rationale for creating the IDCA was to ensure that we would create a platform for the CEOs of the Dev Corps to share information, to collaborate, to identify where there are opportunities to co-invest, and to be able to support each other and to be able to uncover some of these opportunities when they come forward. In fact, we were so interested in looking at this opportunity and collaborating and to see what we can do to support our businesses that we just, in 2019, took a trip to Nuuk to determine whether or not there was interest with Greenlandic businesses to see if Inuit would be able to invest there. The difference between what we saw in Nuuk, and granted we were only in Nuuk as compared to other communities within Greenland, was absolutely stark as compared to what you see in Nunavut and in Nunatsiavut and other Inuit regions in the country. And that's just completely unacceptable. The time is now to make these conservative investments in infrastructure. The time is now to not view the North, the Arctic, as a liability, but to view it as a strategic asset, that what it is, and something that should be recognized around the world. Canada is an Arctic country, yet a very small portion of Canadians have ever been to the North. And so we need to really put a priority on that. We've seen innovation and approaches to investment in infrastructure in the North. P3s have already been implemented. We've seen it with the Iqaluit Airport. We've also seen it in other infrastructure projects, such as the Stanton Hospital in the Northwest Territories. These types of models have actually been happening in the North, and it's time to unleash that and see that as an opportunity to address some parts of investment in the North for Canada. Don't forget, we actually, through the resolution of these land claims, Inuit governments, associations, organizations have been able to accumulate significant financial capital. But these sources of capital are sovereign wealth funds. They're not out there to provide, for the most part, and erode their capital so that you're just providing grants for infrastructure, but rather they would be certainly looking at investing in infrastructure where you generate a return as an infrastructure investor for some of these opportunities. That's where I think we should tremendous role for the government. That's where I see that there's a tremendous role for the infrastructure bank. And Inuit are more than willing and supportive to invest in infrastructure when these market conditions are created. So with that, Stephen, Nakamik.
Thank you, Clint. That's very lots to chew on there and lots of possibilities. I'm now going to quickly turn it over to Madeline and invite her to tell us a little bit about what she is seeing from her perspective. Welcome, Madeline, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much. It's been, of course, really nice to see a lot of familiar faces, not just the panelists, but those in the audience recognize quite a number of names. And one day I can't wait to see you all in person. But to build on what has just been shared by the other panelists is the value and the need for our country to develop a true Arctic strategy, and one which does build on the priorities of Northerners, of Indigenous peoples, and as Jessica said, one that also fulfills our vision as Canada, a nation building, project that we're underway. We are now seeing unprecedented infrastructure investments being made across the country. It was starting pre-COVID, and COVID has highlighted, the value and the need to invest in our communities and across the country, especially in areas where we know there are infrastructure needs and gaps, and broadband to, having basic infrastructure to ensure that communities have water, transportation. The list is long, but the main thing is for us to ensure that, as we begin to develop an Arctic strategy, is to fulfill the vision, of our Northerners and our Indigenous peoples, identifying what those priorities are. The Arctic policy, Northern Policy Framework, was a starting point. What I would recommend is that as we develop the strategy, that we need to break down those silos. On one hand, as Jessica explained, that the North is vast, but the population is small. Most of us know each other. And yet when I see, us having these meetings, we're seeing again and again people saying that the silos need to be broken down, but we constantly, just stay in those silos. There's no reason why we can't have the federal government, our provincial and territorial governments, and our Indigenous governments, and our local municipal governments being in the same room, sharing, what our priorities are and making these decisions together. We need to also ensure that we're doing these macro and micro assessments, especially around the issues around energy, telecommunications, and transportations. We know that there are existing linkages that could be strengthened. We know that, with the projects like the Kivilik Hydro Fiber Link, we're talking about linking not only Manitoba to that region. There's the opportunity with the fiber projects to link northern Nunavik to eastern part of Nunavut. We need to actually be in these rooms together, sort of figuring it out. The funding programs in themselves are not a strategy. So just looking at a couple things that, others like Clint spoke to is, there is capacity without a doubt, but we also need to develop more capacity in areas where we know that we fall short. And sometimes that is not only in Ottawa, who doesn't necessarily always understand the Northern reality. There's lots of turnover that happens there, as well as in our own provincial, territorial, or local governments. Again, a lot of people cycling in and cycling out, as well as, even in our own Inuit and Indigenous organizations. That is probably one of the most biggest challenges that I see, is the constant change of people, where people, sort of finally understand their job or the place that they're living in within, about 2-3 years, and then we see them leave. It is incredibly hard to develop that strategy and those work plans and understand those priorities when we're dealing with a constant turnover. So we need to figure out how, we build capacity in the North and in Ottawa in a more sort of, in a stable way. So lots of as opportunities, as someone said, and nonetheless still lots of challenges. And I agree fully with what everyone said is we need to build back better. And actually, I will adopt a phrase that I just read recently is maybe we, need to consider this as building the future better. In some cases, we're talking about where, with the gaps, we didn't even have the infrastructure in place, like fiber. We need to build future better. And I know we can do it. We just, we have to make it a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madeline. That's, I'm just trying to get my camera back on. There we go. Okay. No, and thanks to the entire panel for your very brief presentations and very much respecting the Institute on Governance direction to keep your remarks relatively brief, so that we can provide maximum opportunity for questions and dialogue amongst with our participants today in our audience. So I'm going to just maybe summarize a couple of key points from the presentations. We've heard certainly from Rob that there's a bit of a sense of urgency from an international perspective in light of the fact that Russia is moving in very deliberate ways, both on its own territory and looking to extend that territory. We've heard from Jessica about the need for the Arctic and Canada's Arctic in particular to be a national priority. How does the Arctic become a national priority for all of Canadians, so those in the 905 believe that federal investment or national attention should be diverted to the North and to the Arctic? We've heard from Clint that there's a wealth of expertise and ability and capacity from Inuit development corporations, and the fact that the skill sets are there. There are mega projects that are possible and can be built by Northerners. And so is now the time to be starting to think about how to make that happen. And Madeline said a number of things, but the one thing that I would like to just sort of pick up on more directly and more immediately is this notion of shared priorities. And in that, the sense that there is likely a bit of shared leadership that is likely on order. The federal government did produce its Arctic and Northern Policy Framework in the fall of 2019. It had a compelling vision that was put in the chat. A strong, self-reliant peoples and communities working together for a vibrant, prosperous, and sustainable Arctic and Northern region at home and abroad, while expressing Canada's enduring Arctic sovereignty. And so it's a pretty compelling and robust vision, and one that I believe certainly has some legitimacy amongst the participants that were involved in that process that helped shape it and build that vision. So what's missing? What's missing from moving from that vision statement to action? What seems to be the stumbling block or the major barrier that is preventing Canada from shifting from this vision statement to action? And I'll just open it up to the panel, and I'll invite each of you to first come, first serve. Who amongst our panel members would like to first jump in on that question?
Sure.
I can go first, Stephen, if that's okay. And basically, the problem that I see for Canada, and part of the reasons why there's such a reluctance, I mean, the stuff that Madeline has talked about, the stuff that Clint has introduced, these are all everyone's preferences. There is no question whatsoever from a domestic development of the infrastructural needs that they have outlined so eloquently are the ones that I think you're not going to find a single Canadian that is going to say, no, that's not what we should, this is what we need to do. We know that. The problem that we face, though, when we start looking at the international side, when we start thinking about the challenges that are here today, not coming somewhere into the future, is that we are left with such a price tag anytime that we're going to come up with anything of a meaningful nature. We can have a framework, we can talk the talk, we can talk about, as this government now talks about, the expression of sovereignty. And all that sounds all hunky-dory and nice and sweet. But the problem is that what we need to do is what we don't want to do, but we need to do it. And when we look at the price tag of the modernization of the North Warning System, the replacement of the CF-18s, which is tied into the defense of the North Warning Sign, when we look at the question of the fact that if we are truly serious in terms of what governments have always said, that the Northwest Passage are internal waters, we're going to be having to face with the issue that, do we mean what we want to do with that? If they're truly internal waters, we have to have the ability to say no to those vessels that we don't want entering. Up till now, we've had the luxury that everybody who has come in plays by the rules, plays by the game. Suez, what the Russians have done, has demonstrated we're going to shortly have a lot of ships coming that we may not necessarily want. And the question is, how do we stop them? We won't stop, we did not stop the New Zealand yachtsmen coming through. We did not, even worse, stop the Chinese icebreaker that did all sorts of surveillance when it went through. And you got to ask the question, how do we do so? And each of those require huge amounts of money, then takes away, and then you put it in the context of the COVID crisis. I mean, remember, this is a country, we haven't had a budget for 2 years. I mean, I dare say that there's going to be real challenges in terms of meeting any of the expenses of day-to-day expenditures, let alone this stuff that has to be done. And so this is the problem. What government wants to deal with it? Does that get you votes? And that's why they ignore it and look onto other issues.
Thanks, Rob. I think some of our other panelists would like to jump in and respond. I'll maybe just sort of encapsulate in short form a question that comes from your comments, and that is Canada's ability to stop marine traffic from entering our waters, is that response dependent on whether we should or whether we can't? And so that's a sort of a short form, and we can come back to that. But now I'd just like to invite Jessica to respond if you could.
Thank you. Building on Rob, you were saying that, there's no one would dispute all those infrastructure projects that people want built. But I think as a whole, Canadians just don't see and have any type of visual sense of a clear long-term vision for our North. Where do we want our North to be in 20 years, let's say, and its relationship to its neighbors, to other countries who are very interested in the Arctic. And so because we don't have a real clear sense of a vision of where we should be going and where we want to be, then, back that with the fact that we don't have a real concise roadmap. So this, an infrastructure investment strategy that is a roadmap to how we're getting to where we're going that demonstrates that, well, then for everyone in the 905, it just looks like, everything is just like another road to nowhere. And people just don't have a sense of why, certain things are important, a road and what a road might provide, why broadband is so imperative. And, the vision is I think Canadians are well aware that everyone deserves these certain, everyone deserves broadband or and clean water and these things, but it's so much bigger and it's so much more. And the way you really attain a lot of these things is to be having a much more robust vision that is also encapsulates the economic opportunities that are there. And so how do you build strategic and social infrastructure together that, almost it's like two birds with one stone, but that's, we need to do better at getting, all Canadians to kind of rally around this idea that we want. The North is important to Canadians and we want to invest and to build there. And exactly, because like you're saying, Stephen, right now we're competing against, every other post-COVID economic issue out there. And so how to best articulate why the North is important in that context.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And if my colleagues would just bear with me, we're starting to get some questions in on the chat line. And I promise Clint and Madeline, if we hit a dry spell, we'll come back to this original question and invite you to weigh in. But in the meantime, I'm wondering if we can just look to respond to, and he's just ran away from me. Oh, there it is. From Rylan, asks, it's a matter of priorities. The price tag of TMX is going to be $12 billion. So it's interesting. It's an interesting comment in terms of, is the Arctic just too expensive for Canada to invest in?
Yeah. So if I may, I actually think people in Ottawa think that. I think people at the levels of government, when we went through the process of land claims, actually figured this as, okay, this is done. This is kind of your problem. You get up there, you manage this, you're, good luck, see you later. And they saw it as a way to kind of wash their hands and move on. When in fact, since this is a constitutionally protected treaty, this was the start of a renewed relationship, not the end of a relationship. And I truly believe, look, I think it goes, I'll say two things really quickly. One, and I'm sounding like a broken record, but it's hard when you have 85% of your entire population living 100 or 200 kilometers from the United States. Like, it's hard to be able to demonstrate to people the real value and the strategic value of our Arctic and our North. There are people walking around in Toronto who would think that the Arctic, nobody lives there. And why would you want to do this? We should protect the whole place and have it as a park. Like, people believe that. And it's because they've never been there. They've never seen it. They're completely disconnected to the fact that Canada is an Arctic country. To me, that's extremely problematic. The second thing is, and I want to hear Madeline's comments on this, but so Madeline and I are, we're business people. And so when you map out a business strategy, the strategy is, where you want to go. So you kind of say, okay, what do I want my business to actually be? And then you simply work backwards to be able to say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Who are the people, the resources, the markets, what do I have to do in order to get to this place? Nobody can articulate what the North will look like in 20 to 40 to 50 years. What's our population going to be there? What will the conditions of our schools be? What will be the condition of our connectivity? Do you see, as Jessica said, some clusters being developed? What are we going to do to attract other unique, innovative businesses to that region of the country? What's the transportation system going to look like? Nobody, be it either in the territories, in the regions, or in Ottawa, which have a legal responsibility for the North, nobody can say, this is what the North is going to look like. This is my vision of the North. This is what I want to see. It's almost as if they're sitting back waiting for someone else to tell them what it should be. And I think that's a shame. It requires strong leadership. And is it expensive? Yeah, of course it's expensive, but it's expensive because you've been ignoring it for the last 50 to 100 years. That's why it's expensive. So nobody should be living in a situation where infrastructure is seen as, I'm waiting for the water truck, right? Nobody, if that was happening in Southern Ontario, people would be going out of their minds if you're waiting for clean water to be trucked into your house. That's just not acceptable. And it's just, I don't think people understand. I don't think people realize that this requires an investment, but if you make it right now, there's going to be a profound positive impact on the country over the next 50 to 100 years. So I'd love to hear my friend Madeline comment on the same thing, please.
Okay, Madeline, you have the parole.
Yeah, so no, there's a lot that Clint says that I agree with, in so much as that, one of the things that we at Arctic 360, Jessica knows as well, have been saying is absolutely needed, necessary is an infrastructure inventory. What actually do we have in the North? At what age and condition, and where are the gaps, what's missing. And I'm really pleased with the fact that our National Inuit organization put out an RFP recently, actually wanting to look at doing that inventory and then working with the regional organizations to identify priority projects. But you need to actually, also look at what that criteria is. And I think that safety and health are, have to be at the top. People need to be able to have clean, safe drinking water. They need to have, safe homes. And then, as I said earlier, when you actually can get the right people in the room, and it's not even that many people. That's what just, boggles my mind. And then say that, we need a balanced approach. You need to invest in some social infrastructure, which is like housing, because, you can't have and shouldn't have 16 people or more, 4 generations living in a 3-bedroom house, with mold conditions, that is just causing all sorts of social ills. And we're prepared to, put a lot of money in, the justice system as a reaction rather than, actually investing in preventative measures. But at the same time, we know that we need to develop an economy. And so Greenland is moving towards self-rule, and it's recognizing that you have to make some really tough decisions. Where are you going to put your limited, your capacity, your limited time, your limited resources, trying to convince Denmark and others, to invest in your region, because without an economy, it's really tough. So, we have communities where the numbers of jobs are fixed. So the only way that someone, who's coming of age or someone who's unemployed is going to get a job is that someone dies, someone retires, someone leaves the community, or someone is fired. I mean, that's a bizarre and, unacceptable situation. We need to literally figure that out. So, I do think that there is immense resources and wealth. When someone says, should we be investing in the Arctic? Damn right we should. Other Arctic nations are investing in their north, and we're seeing, how those investments are reaping benefits, whether it's Tromsø with the university, the broadband and hydroelectric projects in Greenland. I've talked to those residents and those policy makers and those decision, makers, and sort of said, well, hey, do you have a case for, how the, broadband was a good investment, and did you have to prove it afterwards? And they're like, no, of course not. Like, we're just reaping the benefits of it. So I don't understand why Canada is really reluctant. I think it's just that it's so big, or we're just not, as I spoken to earlier, not stable enough, in our managerial positions and our leadership positions to just, really just decide that we can do it, we should do it, and get ourselves in the room, because, yes, things are expensive. And as Clint said, in part because we haven't made those investments. But the cost of not investing is creating all sorts of harms, and not only at the community level, with the people level, but it's actually causing, real problems in our country where, other countries like China want to invest in our north, but we're not prepared to. And we're going to compromise, our regional and our national security because of it.
Thanks, Madeline. I'm going to be a little bit provocative, and I'm not trying to antagonize our panel, but I just wanted to throw out other factoids. So on an annual basis, the federal government does transfer close to $4 billion annually to territorial governments. And in addition to that, and that excludes some federal department expenditures that are over and above those transfers. Recently, the Canadian Coast Guard has announced, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, an Arctic region. So they're looking to start getting more focused on the Canadian Arctic from a more integrated perspective. And there's been recent investments in broadband from national broadband strategies from ISED. So I just wanted to throw out a couple of those little factoids, and based on previous government investments, there was several 150 million in the construction of the Canadian High Arctic Research Station, 400 million for a Tuck Road. So there have been federal investments that have occurred in addition to Arctic patrol ships that are just now coming off the assembly line, so to speak. So I guess there is federal investment, but let's crank it up a notch. Let's talk about the fact that that investment is there, but what more is needed, and how do you get that more? Because there isn't an absence of investment. It's just there seems to be an abundance of need.
Well, I can jump in. Yeah. So yes, there is money, but as I said earlier, the programs are not a strategy. And we've seen, for decades, I was the executive director of the Kikitani Truth Commission, and we looked at, that period of transition from 1950 to 75. And then, of course, I've paid attention to what's happened from 75 to now. And there's just so much that, that has been spent in the North that I would say has not been strategic, and that haven't really, changed or moved, the economic and socioeconomic well-being of Northerners. It's in part because we just refuse to actually do the work of having a strategy, and we have just sort of visions, and it's all lofty, and somehow, someone else is supposed to fix it. And so the North, as Clint, I think, said, looks to sort of Ottawa to fix it. Now Ottawa sort of wants to defer everything to the North, and everyone's just sort of pointing the fingers and not getting it done. So, the fact of yes, you've got some investments on broadband, but I've looked at, the last 20 years of investments in telecommunications, and we have the worst telecommunications despite hundreds of millions of dollars of subsidies that have been paid out, and we pay the highest rates for the worst service. We're held hostage, because of these, lack of strategy, the wrong criteria, the wrong projects getting funded, and the lack of sort of, accountability for where those funds have gone. And we've got to stop. I mean, the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. The reality is that what we've been doing is insane, and we've got to stop it. We've got to do it better.
Madeline, I think that was very good. Thank you for sharing that. I know others want to jump in. I do want to maybe just kind of put a bow around what you described, and this is more policy short form. If you're looking at an input kind of calculation, I think the Arctic has a tough case to make the rest of Canada want to put more inputs in. But if you want to have a conversation around outcomes, what outcomes is Canada trying to achieve both in the Arctic and internationally? That creates a different dynamic in which the Arctic actually should migrate a little further up on the priority agenda, perhaps. So I just invite us to think about the dangerous calculation that happens between input debates versus outcome debates. So,
Stephen,
yes,
just picking up on that point and what Madeline was saying, I just want to make sort of three very quick points. I mean, one of the greatest challenges, and this feeds, I've heard Madeline speak on this before, and it's the ultimate issue of course, wealth generation in the context of the North. You listed off transfer payments, so the $4 billion. Well, that is a transfer payment. That is transfer. And so we run into this issue going very much of what Madeline was saying in terms of where do you get the resources to do what you need to do. Now, the other thing you listed off, Stephen, that I think that we really have to dwell on for a certain degree is, of course, you mentioned the High Arctic Research Station. I challenge you to go to the liberal statement of the Northern Framework. Find a single reference to the High Arctic Station. It's, you know, I'll save you, there isn't any. And what has been introduced into Canadian politics in general, but it has a hugely detrimental effect in the North, is this growing, and I think we've picked up the habit from the Americans increasingly, is the refusal to have a bipartisan long-term approach. In other words, what we're seeing now within, you know, one of the things that really aggravated me, I'll be honest, about the liberal policy, beyond, well, if you can call it a policy, but their framework was their utter refusal. All they did is cast derision on the preceding conservative government. There is absolutely nothing constructive. They gave no credit, and the whole ability to have this long-term plan that Madeline talks about from a political perspective is being destroyed. In other words, if you can't even acknowledge the importance of the High Arctic and say research station, how you're going to bring that in and how you're going to integrate that as some form of connection, I mean, that says something. And it gets to the point, the North has 3 MPs. And I think that what we're seeing is this hyper politicization of North American politics, which basically what happens within any PMO increasingly is sort of like, does this get us reelected? If it doesn't get us reelected, we're sure as hell not going to give credit to the guys before us. And we're sure as heck not going to build on anything that might separate us from the political problem. And I think that that has really problems for the North.
I think we're going to have some lively post-discussion chat rooms when we conclude at the top of the hour. So we have just a few minutes left. There is a question that I would like to read and maybe give Clint a chance to respond to. And the question is this. There is a huge need of investments, but no country, not even Canada, may have enough financial resources because of the pandemic. Where might Canada get enough money from? And this would be a big issue. There is pressure from the US, but there's also internal pressure. What solution could Canada find? And I'm going to help the questioner a little bit and add to it, if they will permit me, and say, what opportunities are there for private capital to help with addressing this issue, Clint?
So I think, and it's a great question, I think there's a tremendous opportunity. I think you have to be able to demonstrate a level of, to a certain degree, financial innovation to ensure that an infrastructure investment happens. There's billions upon trillions of dollars that are looking to be deployed. In fact, there are national and international pension funds, foundations, Indigenous trusts that are all looking to deploy their capital in a way that would generate a return that would be both responsible and meet the requirements of their investment policy statements. It's more expensive to build in the North. It's more expensive to be able to put together a team to do this kind of work in the North. And so I think, other tools of government to be able to utilize their capital in order to help to improve the economics and strengthen the financial return to create that incentive for private sector capital to invest. Be it that you'd have the government of Canada, or in some respects, the territorial governments, to take on some of the risk. I think that we already have examples of how we've done it before, and I mentioned them earlier. being some P3s in terms of Stanton Hospital, as well as the Calgary Airport. So no, there is, listen, Stephen, without a doubt, there is private sector capital there that exists. And there's a role for the government of Canada to be able to come in and to actually help to de-risk some of this and to provide that incentive in order for private sector capital to invest, which would include both Indigenous and non-Indigenous investors.
Thank you, Clint. And I'm just going to draw your direct linkage to Rob's last point. And for government to depoliticize the North and the Arctic and make it less partisan is probably going to go a long way to de-risk the environment and allow for more proper consideration and planning. Now, Jessica, you want to jump in, but Jeff's giving me an evil eye. But I will let you jump in, Jessica, because
one quick thing.
Coffee or something. That's good.
Yeah. So how do you get people to want to invest? I'll just say one quick thing. Clint mentioned that there needs to be financial innovation. Obviously, the CIB can play one role in this. I think a lot of it also comes from leadership in countries. They say, they want to be like leaders in the world of these certain things. And I think if we look again at our Arctic neighbors, they've decided to capitalize on what their North offers them. And so they are, Norway, it's like, we're going to be the world innovators in remote healthcare and looking how you do remote surgery and all these type of things. Also looking at how you build infrastructure on permafrost melt. And so I think if we have a different way of understanding and looking at what the potential and what the innovative possibilities could be, where, why are we not thinking about new materials, the best in, kind of materials that are going to be able to deal with, climate change and they're, again, with like permafrost melt. So for housing, for instance. So it's more about trying to see where there's a lot of opportunity, minus the mobility and the, with the minerals and this type of stuff. So it's really trying to capitalize on those opportunities and thinking outside the box as to what those opportunities are. And, innovation and new innovations always attract different types, of investors. How do we maintain batteries in cold weather? I don't know, right? For the cars. I mean, it's a problem for Minnesota as much as it is for the North, so.
Exactly. There's some natural advantages. So, Dr. Kinder, I will respect your role in this policy crunch affair and turn the microphone over to you, sir, and give us good counsel and direction.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you to all four of the panelists. Just a really rich discussion. Really learned a lot.